Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Andrew Mushbaugh, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Trent DeBruin. And today's episode is a follow-up to the last one we did. So today we're going to talk through part 2 of how we manage our money and financial plans. And in part 1, we walk through, number 1, how we get organized and track our finances. Number 2, our views on debt and how we manage it. And number 3, the way that we save and prioritize and how we think about cash flow. So if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, we'd recommend starting there. And today we're going to go through the last 3 areas, which are how we manage our investments, looking at risk management from estate planning and insurance, and finally, balancing it all and putting the pieces together. So when it comes to investing, I'll first start by saying what I don't do. I don't invest based on Reddit forums.
Well, that's a great starting point there, and that makes 2 of us.
Okay, good. Yeah. Now that we have that out of the way, I'll talk about how I approach investing. And after knowing that I'm taking care of the most important part, which is having a plan and saving enough, it makes the next part on how to invest the money a lot easier. Having a plan and knowing when I need to have the money for each of the different goals gives me my investment time horizon, and that allows me to figure out what my investment allocation is. And although I already have touched on this in part 1 of the podcast, the first part of investing I view is having enough liquidity or money in cash reserves to cover any unforeseen expenses, which is why I always make sure I have a $20,000 cash buffer on the outside sitting in an emergency fund. And from there, I break down each of the goals I'm saving for based on their time horizon. For the down payment that I was previously saving up for, since it was less than 2 years away when we started saving, I held everything in cash at Ally Bank and gradually watched those monthly emails telling me they were lowering their rate. But in hindsight, would it have been better to have been invested 100% in stocks while the market went up 30%? Absolutely. But I didn't feel comfortable taking that risk with short-term money, and I didn't think twice about doing anything different with that bucket. The next 2 biggest goals are retirement and college for Grant, both of which are 10 plus years away. And since I view those as long-term, I'm comfortable with a higher daily and yearly swings of the stock market in exchange for the higher probability of having a higher return down the road. So for both retirement and college savings, I'm invested 100% in stocks for those goals through broadly diversified mutual funds. For the MESP 529 plan, I opted not to do the target date fund because I want to have 100% in stocks, and I don't mind adjusting the allocation over time. So I created a mix of investments based on the same allocation we use for our clients. The 529 plan has limited options, and I wanted to match the allocation closely to what we use for our clients. So I have 90% in the global equity index and 10% in the international equity index. And I did this because I wanted to have a little more international and emerging markets exposure. Over time, I'll gradually shift this allocation to be more conservative with more in bonds and cash as we get closer to college. For retirement, I also have a 100% stock allocation, and I invest using the same globally diversified DFA mutual funds that we use for our clients. And to avoid going too far into the weeds, I have a little heavier tilt towards smaller companies and value-oriented companies because historically they've had higher returns. And having heavier tilts comes with prolonged periods where I may underperform relatively. But knowing I'm investing over multiple decades, I choose to stack the odds in my favor of earning a little higher return based on all the research. And I don't spend time trying to time the market or tinker with my portfolio, and whenever I have cash available, I invest based on the same allocation. The only difference is that the cash goes toward whatever is relatively underweight to the initial targets I laid out. And this further allows me to take out any potential to guess or overthink where to invest new money. I'm perfectly content focusing on hitting singles and doubles and don't care about missing out on the latest hot stock like Tesla or Bitcoin because I prefer to fully understand exactly what can be expected because I know that if I follow the plan, I'll meet all those goals that we have, and that's enough for me.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, my investment approach is really similar to Andrew's. For any short-term goals, like when Jen and I were saving for our current house, I keep the money in cash since I care more about having it available when needed than potentially missing out on higher investment returns. For the college savings goal, our oldest son is 6, so we know we have a fairly long time horizon with 12 years until he starts college, and therefore we feel comfortable being more aggressive in the way we invest the money. So for the kids' 529 plans, the money is invested mainly in stocks, with a mix of exposures across U.S. stocks, international developed markets, and emerging markets. And down the road, as we get closer to college and actually needing to use the money, we'll start to reduce the percentage of stocks and increase the percentage of bonds to smooth the ride and avoid the possibility that there's a big stock market correction right when we need to withdraw the money. And in this sense, the approach is similar to what we follow with clients as they approach retirement, dialing down the stocks to reduce the volatility of the portfolio and have more unstable investments like bonds that we can withdraw from. And with the retirement investments, when thinking about my retirement goal of financial independence at age 55, I know that means I have 20 years until that date, then another projected 40 plus years past that date based on life expectancy. So really the overall investment timeline for our retirement money is around 60 years. And given that timeline, I feel comfortable being really aggressive in the way the money's invested, so I'm 100% invested in stocks. And I know there's going to be ups and downs along the way, and when those happen with a 100% stock portfolio, that'll mean big swings in the portfolio value. But I feel confident that those corrections and the periodic bear markets will just be short-term pauses and pullbacks within a longer-term uptrend of the stock market. And I invest using the same DFA mutual funds that we use for our clients, which provide great global diversification at a low cost. And I also have heavier tilts to small cap and value stocks because I believe those will provide extra return over time. And I'm comfortable with the slightly bumpier road owning a higher percentage there. And I don't own any individual stocks, and I'm never trying to pick winners or losers or guess whether Coke will do better than Pepsi. And I also don't try to time the market or make predictions. And whenever I have cash available to invest, I go ahead and invest it rather than trying to wait for a pullback or trying to figure out the right time to invest. And I rarely check my investment performance, not more than once or twice a year. Although, the same way we approach things for our clients, I revisit my portfolio every couple weeks to see if there are opportunities to rebalance, which consists of selling some of the investments that have outperformed and buying more of what's underperformed in order to bring my overall investment allocation back to my target, which is aligned with our goals. And getting a little bit more into the weeds from my taxable investment account, and again, just like we do for our clients, I'm focused on the areas I can control. So when there's a market pullback, I try to take advantage of harvesting losses for tax purposes. And with a 100% stock portfolio, outside of adding new cash, this is the main planning opportunity I can take advantage of whenever there's a market pullback. And I'm also intentional with where I put certain investment funds based on the tax treatment of my investment accounts, which is called asset placement. I make sure that I own the investments with the highest expected returns in our Roth accounts, since that money will never be taxed again. And in my taxable accounts, I try to use more tax-efficient investments, knowing I'll have to pay taxes along the way on those investments. So overall, it's not the sexiest approach, and when Andrew and I are hanging out at the water cooler at the office, I'm not able to brag about owning Tesla when it quadrupled, but it's the most effective long-term approach, and it's supported by the decades of research. And Andrew and I think we both care much more about substance over style when it comes to the investments.
Yeah, no, our water cooler talk doesn't consist much of CNBC or Jim Cramer talk, but I'll take the trade-off of less excitement today for a better and much more predictable long-term return.
Yeah, I don't think I can remember the last time I read anything from CNBC, and I'm no doubt better off for it.
Oh yeah, no, I'm definitely right there with you. And now on to the less exciting but still important part of our overall financial plan, which is about protecting our risks. And prior to having Grant, there was less risk that we were worried about covering since both of us were working and we had no debt prior to our house. And that all changed when we had Grant and bought our house because now we have other goals we're saving for and also want to make sure Grant is taken care of in the event something happened to both Jenny and I. The first part we moved on was making sure that we had an estate plan in place. The biggest reason for this is because we wanted to specifically name our guardians versus letting the state decide. And since Jen and Trent love kids and are still going to be one short of a starting five in basketball when they have their next baby, we named them as our guardians.
And we really thank you for that, but nothing better happened to you and Jenny.
Yeah, not planning on it.
All right, good.
Outside of that, the next area to cover is around insurance. With my wife working at Salesforce, she's able to get cheap group coverage through work along with a disability insurance policy. And given she's planning to stay there for the foreseeable future, I was comfortable saving on premiums by having her use the group coverage versus purchasing an outside term life insurance policy. If my wife leaves Salesforce at some point, then we'll revisit life insurance coverage at that time between continuing with group benefits versus purchasing an individual policy. As for me, being self-employed, the only option I have is to purchase an individual policy, which I'm in the process of getting a $1 million 20-year term life insurance policy. And as we have more kids, I'll revisit this amount. But with the business in place, we're also in the process of setting up a buy-sell where my ownership interest would be effectively bought out by the policy and go to Jenny. So this lowers my need for as much in the personal life insurance coverage. The last main area is around disability insurance. And my wife gets this through work, like I mentioned, so it's very cost effective. But trying to purchase a policy on your own is quite a bit more expensive. And given the nature of my job, I'd have to have a pretty severe event to be unable to work. Could this happen? While it's a low probability, of course it could. But we made the intentional decision to self-insure knowing that my wife always plans to work as well. And as we accumulate more in savings, the risk or need for disability insurance goes down. So we're choosing to self-insure and save on premiums to grow our investments faster. And there's no right or wrong answer here, but we're comfortable with our plan of how to handle any risks that would come up.
Well, with my estate planning, I wanted to make sure I returned the favor. So Jen and I named Andrew and Jenny as the guardians for our kids. Although, Andrew, I guess that's not totally fair since you guys only have the one and we're about to have four.
Yeah, it definitely seems a little lopsided here, but I'll give you the same advice with an even stronger emphasis that nothing better happen to you guys.
Absolutely. We'll make sure we wear the seatbelts and stay away from the skydiving.
Sounds good.
But with estate planning, we have the full package in terms of a will, powers of attorney, and a trust. And for younger families, the most important part of estate planning is at least having a will so that you have guardians named for your kids. But when we set up our estate plan, we decided to spend a little extra money to also add a trust. Not for estate tax purposes, but more so because it makes things cleaner and easier with the estate plan and also gives more control of how things are distributed, so that if something happened to Jen and me, the kids wouldn't suddenly inherit a bunch of money when they turned 18 and not know what to do with it. And in terms of disability insurance, I followed a similar approach as Andrew. For our family, since we rely on my income, in theory, disability insurance is even more important, since something that impacted my income would have a bigger impact than it would, for example, on Andrew's family if something happened to his. However, like Andrew mentioned, given the nature of our job, it would have to be a pretty dramatic and severe situation for me to not be able to work. And since I have life insurance to protect against the worst case scenario, which I'll discuss in a second, I feel comfortable with that risk and decided not to pay for disability insurance. And I also know that with each year that passes, my calculated need for disability insurance decreases as our savings and assets grow. So as you can see with insurance, there are often times when you need to weigh the cost of coverage with the risk you're protecting against and the probability of that risk materializing. And that's a good segue to talking about life insurance, which is a risk that I'm not comfortable taking on, and instead happily pay for the insurance. And similar to disability insurance, since our household relies solely on my income, my need for life insurance is even higher. Yes, if something happened to me, Jen could go back to her job as a nurse, but there would be a difference in income, and that would likely involve additional costs for things like childcare. So clearly I have a significant need for life insurance, and the way I thought about the term of the insurance was to have coverage through when our youngest child graduates from college. But rather than having the full amount of coverage for that entire time, I did something called laddering. So initially, when my oldest son was born back in 2014, I bought a 30-year term policy. Then later, as our family grew, I bought a second policy, but this time a 20-year policy. So I now have enough coverage for enough time, but that coverage is staggered, where one policy naturally rolls off sooner than the other one. And knowing that life insurance needs tend to decline over time as you accumulate more savings and investments and have fewer people relying on your income, this works well, and it allows me to save money on insurance premiums along the way. Also, since it's term life insurance, I know that if at some point between now and the end of the policies I no longer need the coverage, I can drop it at no cost. And one last thing to mention on insurance, we also have a personal liability umbrella policy. So if someone got injured on our property, or if we were in a car accident and there was a lawsuit, this insurance would supplement the liability coverage in our home and auto insurance and provide an additional layer of protection so that our personal assets wouldn't be accessed in a settlement. And while that scenario is pretty rare, umbrella coverage is pretty cheap, and it's just nice to have that extra protection and peace of mind to guard against that potential risk.
All right, now we'll move on to the last topic we'll discuss, which is about tying everything together. And we've mainly touched on purely the financial side of things, but an equally important part is having the right mindset toward money and striking the balance of enjoying life along the way with saving enough for the future. Working with clients earlier in their career through the later stages of their life has really given me a unique perspective around money. I've been able to see and hear things that people either regret or are happy they did. And this has really shaped how I personally view managing our finances, along with how we advise clients. The biggest thing for me is that I don't want to have to worry about money. Now, that's easier said than done, but it's not just worrying about having enough money in the future, but also about not worrying about it on a day-to-day basis or letting it dictate too much of my decision-making. For me, it's about having quote-unquote enough and then doing my best to fight against my natural disposition of saving more aggressively at the expense of not doing things like vacations, buying things for a house that my wife likes, or enjoying eating out. And on that point, there was a party that was thrown by a billionaire on Shelter Island, and the author Kurt Vonnegut was there with his friend Joseph Heller, and he said to their host, who's a hedge fund manager, that he had made more money in a single day than Heller had ever earned from his very popular novel Catch-22 over its entire history. And Heller paused for a second and responded, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough." And that story really resonates with me, and it's so true and lines up with exactly what we've experienced working with clients, which is that there's no magic number or portfolio size where you all of a sudden feel perfectly content or realize what enough is. And with that in mind, outside of knowing what enough is for our family, I want to make sure I'm enjoying things along the way. And one of the best descriptions I've read on this is, earlier in life, we trade time for money. Then in the future, we trade money for time. And so you better make sure that the time you trade today is worth that money. And since we can't get time back, I'm constantly working toward maximizing everything I can today with being smart about the future. And the best way I've been able to do this is the idea of knowing where we want to be in the future and the goals we have, and then ensuring that I'm saving enough to be on track or slightly ahead to meet those. And from there, I can feel guilt-free to spend a little bit more money today on things that we enjoy as a family.
Yeah, it's funny just how similar we are when it comes to all this, and it's probably good that we're aligned on the big areas because this is often the hardest part to help people wrap their heads around.
Exactly, but yeah, it also makes our job so rewarding, and so I feel so fortunate to not have to have the set target retirement date in mind.
Absolutely. And from my perspective, when it comes to the big picture and balancing everything with regard to finances, there are enough other things going on in life, in our family, and areas where I want to focus my time and energy that I just don't want money to be a big focus or source of stress for me or for us, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. And as I've mentioned, one of the ways I try to achieve this is by keeping a slightly bigger cash cushion than what's considered financially optimal. Another way is by having clarity on Jen's and my goals in terms of knowing exactly what we need to do from a savings perspective, whether that's college for the kids, retirement, or other goals, then automating that saving so we don't even have to think about it day to day or month to month. And I fully subscribe to that time-money trade-off that Andrew mentioned and that philosophy of making sure you enjoy the present. But as a natural saver, I have to constantly fight that tendency to want to save rather than spend money. So that's something I continue to work on. And I know that our family has and will continue to have enough when it comes to money. So I never want to sacrifice time or enjoyment of experiences with our family just for money. And I know that down the road, I'd absolutely regret deciding not to take that big family vacation or take a certain amount of time off of work in favor of saving or earning that extra money. So I always try to channel my future self when thinking about those decisions. And our kids are still young right now, but I know they won't stay that way forever, and I'm already seeing how fast the time goes. So I just want to soak it up and enjoy all the moments along the way without worrying about the future or stressing about money. And for Jen and me, family is far and away the most important thing in our lives, so that's what we always prioritize. And I'm definitely not perfect when it comes to all this, but these are the things I continue to strive toward. And luckily I have Jen and Andrew as well as accountability partners along the way.
Yeah, we make a good team, and our wives like to joke that between family events and work, we probably spend more time together than with them.
Well, so far we haven't gotten sick of each other, so let's hope that continues.
So we went through a lot here between the past two podcasts, and if you listen to both, our message is consistent across the board, and we can't stress enough how important it is that each person is unique, and you need to find what works for you. So hopefully you enjoyed learning a little more about how we approach things personally, and if either Jen or Jenny made it this far into the podcast, we want to reiterate that this does not count as our annual financial plan review. And as always, we appreciate you joining us for another episode of the podcast, and thank you for the time you spend with us. If you have any thoughts to share or questions you'd like to have answered, feel free to email us at info@mdwmllc.com. You can also visit the podcast page of our website at mdwmllc.com/podcast to see the show notes and what all we covered today. Take care, everyone, and we look forward to talking again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.